Okay, so the Yeshiva, our Yeshiva, has Baruch Hashem been successful in spreading its light and spreading its Torah across the world to its many incredible Talmidim. And I'm now welcoming you from the Shalhevet High School in Los Angeles. And I have the honor today of welcoming, well, not really welcoming, because this is not Yeshiva HaRetzion, it's not the mountain we're normally at, but welcoming to this program, Rabbi Yitzchak Etshalom, a great friend, a mentor, and someone who has, Baruch Hashem, been so successful in spreading Torah online, in person, in schools, and in shuls. And this is his high school, the high school in which he's the head of. I'll let him explain the tracks that he runs and the Torah that he teaches. Welcome, Rabbi Etshalom.
So, Taragin, it's actually my honor to welcome you here to Shalhevet. A few years ago, Shalhevet decided to launch a Beit Midrash program for the first time, and they asked me to come on as Rosh Beit Midrash, and Baruch Hashem, we've had a lot of success with getting students, typically the seniors, who want to learn skills and want to learn skills independently, and so they insist, across the board, they insist whenever we start a sugya, they want to deal with it on their own before and getting any help, and then they want to do the review together in class. And one of the litmus tests that we had was that at the end of the first semester, a few weeks ago, had each one of them in a charuta study a sugya that I did not teach. And then they had to teach it to the class. And they were excited about how well they were able to conquer texts that they weren't guided in. So it was a lot of fun.
So on that note, it's Parshas Tisa. And are the Jews a little bit too dependent? You're trying to create independence in your Talmidim. Is that what's happening to the people? They've just seen so many miracles, and Moshe has steered them and guided them, and now that Moshe's away and late, it's hard for them to empower themselves towards the courage that it takes to believe. Well, what's your read of the Egel?
You know, I always thought that for a long time, that there's really a blaming finger at Am Yisrael for not having the patience and not having the miracles of Yetziat Mitzrayim and of Kriyat Yam Suf and of the Revelation be enough for them so that they could sit for a few weeks and wait. And then I look at it from the other perspective. I said, okay, first of all, who are these people? But more critically, what have they experienced right now? They've been with Moshe Rabbeinu as a leader the whole time. Moshe Rabbeinu is over 80 years old. Even then, that was old. Moshe Rabbeinu has now been going up and down a mountain numerous times. And then the last thing they see is he says, okay, I'm going to the mountain, and as you requested, people requested that he be the go-between. I'm going to leave Aharon and Hur in charge. Anybody who has an issue, go to them, which might sound like he's leaving and not coming back. And then they see him go up into a cloud, and they walk into a consuming fire. That's what they see from the bottom. Here's this man who's been going up and down, and he's over 80, and he says, I'm leaving Aaron and Hur in charge, and he walks into a fire. I'm a little surprised it took them this long to suddenly realize their need for a leader. How that need for a leader played out is another problem. But I think that we also have to, and that's something that's, I think, a key in studying Tanakh, studying anything, is that we always have to put ourselves into that situation. I have a phrase I teach my students, and I have a student here who, when I open my mouth to start it, he finishes the sentence for me, says, you cannot understand Tanakh unless you understand the world of Tanakh. And in the same way with Gemara, you have to know what the surroundings are about. You can't hope to understand why these people react the way they do without putting yourself in their mindset. And what is it they saw? Nobody told them 40 days. Moshe didn't sell them back in 40 days. Moshe went into the thing and he said, I'm leaving them in charge of you. So in a sense, it's almost not a banner of honor, but it's a little surprising that the people were able to wait that long until they suddenly felt abandoned. And maybe at that point they're waiting for some message that they should continue moving without Moshe necessarily. He's gone. So that's one piece of the puzzle that I think that's worth exploring. Another piece of the puzzle is, where does the blame for the Egel really lie? And what was the real problem with the Egel? Remember, when Aaron constructed or forged the Egel, what did he say? Chag Lashem Machar. And so is the Egel really a statement of saying, we're rejecting God and we're now adopting some local deity? Or is it a thing of saying that, no, as far as we know, You're supposed to have some sort of a figurine, which is the focal point of your worship, and we have been without one, and now let's make one. And almost as if making things even more ironic, what is it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands? And according to the Ramban, even before this, he says, I want you to make a Mishkan filled with gold, and sitting in the middle of the Mishkan is an Aron, and on top of the Aron is a Kaporet with 2 kruvim out of pure gold. And as Rav Bazak taught in that famous article many years ago, that's very likely what the kruvim looked like, was like oxen. So where's the problem? Now, I mean, I have an idea about where the problem is, but I'm not sure that I think we're reading typically that Parsha is read quite in a black and white fashion. And I think there's a lot more texture to it.
What about leadership? I think we both, being in Yeshiva, meeting these great, great people, sitting next to people who then went on to become leaders. They're one of the banners of our yeshivas, our ability to thank God, spread our Torah, our thoughts, our ideas. The end of the Parsha Moshe comes down. I think that initial read, he has a harsh response. It's offensive to him. It's repugnant. There's everything he has stood for, monotheism, Panei lo yiro, Kol Dvarim Atem Shomim, and weeks afterwards. So there's this initial gut, visceral reaction. But what happens in the end of the Parsha? You'd expect him to be more conciliatory, more embracing, better understanding of human nature, that human nature is weak and frail. And he takes his tent and he moves it out of the machna, and he moves it away from the people. And it's a very sad scene. You expect it, from a certain perspective, at the time that people need him the most, he's furthest from them. Is this part of his strategy? Is part of his strategy, as I alluded to before, that you can't be so dependent on me. You have to build that relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And I know that you're struggling, and I know that there's weakness now, but now's the time for rehabilitation. You have to look to Kadosh Baruch Hu. I won't be here forever. And you can't break into, you can't be shattered when I disappear. And now you have to be empowered. I think our yeshiva tries to empower people, not just to...
I don't doubt that that's a valid statement. And I don't doubt that that's a valid lesson that can be drawn from this story. But I'm not sure if that's what's actually happening with Moshe. Moshe himself identifies, when he's talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Sefer Midbar, as a nursing parent. Right? Kasher Yisrael Tayonek. And he feels that way towards Am Yisrael, because he expresses it, so we know that he feels that way, as if this is my little flock, not little in a sense of numbers, but little in a sense of maturity and independence. And perhaps, and we both know this as parents, perhaps one of the most, maybe the most trying moment for a parent is to step away. You're accustomed to taking care of all the needs, and of course it's something of a relief when you can step back and your kid can walk to school on their own, or ride their bike on their own, or get in the car on their own. But there's something painful about that, and what becomes the most painful is when you have to train the child to be not just independent of you, but to seek guidance from elsewhere also, besides being independent on their own. And I believe that if we're to accord Moshe altruistic motives, in his shattering the luchot, in his moving the tent away, etc., that we would see it as he's putting on, as it were, panim nizafim, like angry face towards Am Yisrael, to try to get them to, like you said, become independent, but also to seek out perhaps other vehicles, because he's not going to be around forever. But the really interesting thing is the way Moshe talks to Bnei Yisrael, and the way Moshe talks to God. The famous story, I think, was of the Chazon Ish, about a fellow who came up to the Chazon Ish and said, I was offered a job in yeshiva, and I think I should take the job. Chazon Ish said, it's a terrible idea. You should not take the job under any circumstances. In the meantime, the yeshiva contacted the Chazon Ish and asked, what about this candidate? He said, he's a great candidate. So evidently somebody found out about this seemingly duality, right? And the answer was, for him, taking the job would have been a terrible idea. But for them, hiring the guy would have been great. Each answer was independently correct.
Today that wouldn't work, because they'd be WhatsApping each other with
Of course, right.
That's a Chazon Ish story. Don't try it at home.
Can't have, right. And of course, Chazon Ish's story may not have happened.
Posting it on Facebook.
But they didn't tell stories like that about you and me. Right. But in the same way, Moshe, when he's talking to Bnei Yisrael, is filled with anger. righteous, indignant anger. On the other hand, when he's talking to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, he's got another kind of anger, which is v'im ayin mechenina masifrecha. And this is the pain, because the ultimate sacrifice that Moshe has to make to be a successful leader of Bnei Israel is to give them up, which of course takes us back to the Akedah. The ultimate statement of Abraham's fatherhood to Yitzchak is actually walking away. And so it seems that Moshe, and that's why we have such an amazing portrait of Moshe in this parsha, of acting angry towards his flock and then defending his flock. And that's why the parsha Malot is so scary. That when Moshe turns to God and says, I can't take them anymore, that's the real fear. Tisa is almost a beautiful picture when you see the whole piece. And the real fear comes, and that's maybe where the upside down nuns are, and that's maybe where everything goes south, is when Moshe turns to God and says, I can't take it anymore.
What lessons of leadership do you remember drawing from Yeshiva, your time in Yeshiva? I mean, it's been so many years. But you come
I'll tell you one story. I'll tell you one story. This happened, of course, we weren't there together. I was there before you. And just a few things. But one story sticks out, and it's a minor story. But, the minor stories are the ones that sort of you use to fertilize bigger pictures. When I was in Yeshiva, I was living in Yerushalayim. I was commuting in every day. And there was a doctor strike. And the word on the radio was very much, the media was taking position very anti-doctor. And the word on the radio was that people were coming to the emergency room and weren't getting any help. And that the big thing was, preemies are dying. That was the word. So I walked up with my chavruta, I walked up to Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal, and it's so hard for me to say that, in the Beit Midrash during morning Seder, and we asked him if he would address the issue. Now, I had originally been in a different yeshiva, in which having a havamina that you could ask such a thing of the Rosh Yeshiva was off the table. Because that's the doctors, that's out there, that's not the yeshiva.
Torah had nothing to say about anything outside the Beis Midrash.
Right. Not that he might say something about it but not in the Beit Midrash. It doesn't belong there. Right?
Big red boundary, red line in the sand between the world of Kodesh and the world.
No windows in the Beit Midrash, doesn't work. I'm taking away Tal's architecture.
Mixed metaphors.
Right. And so, because there was only one Zohar in the two. We asked him if he would address the issue, and he agreed to do so. And he got up and gave a sikha for the last half hour of morning Seder. He got up, everybody came around, he got up and gave a sikha, and in classic Rav Lichtenstein manner, he presented the position of the doctors, he presented the position of the hospitals, or whoever it was, Kupat Cholim, and he pointed out that there's a lot of nuances and it's not a simple issue at all. Of course, we knew that. And then we went up to him afterwards and said, can we go talk to the doctors? And he gave us reshut, and I went with a few guys, and we went during afternoon Seder, we went into Hadassah and Sofim, we sat down with the doctors, and we said, nobody knows your story, we want to hear your story. And they talked to us, and we got the picture, and it rounded out the sikha. Now that's obviously something we do once. We didn't do it every week, we didn't do it every month, we did it once. But the statement of our job in the yeshiva is to learn. But our grander job in the yeshiva is to have that light come in and go out. So we don't go just talk to the doctors without the sikha, but we also don't just have the sikha without talking to the doctors. It's a real integrated model of what it means to be part of a society. And especially when, as Rav Lichtenstein said, before making Aliyah, when we're not on the 50-yard line, as people would be dying to be this Sunday, but rather, we're filming this just before the Super Bowl, but we're on the field, right? And when you're on the field, when you're in Israel, when everything that happens should impact on you, it's important to be involved with what's going on. And that's a big lesson that we learned in the Yeshiva.
It's funny because your story reminded me of a different lesson. Someone asked me, I was on a panel a while back, and someone asked me, what's the legacy of your Yeshiva? What's the legacy of Rav Lichtenstein? Beyond the obvious. Don't tell me about the Torah and the Lamdos and the Tanakh and the identity. What is the identity of a Gush Talmud? So I said, to me, it boils down to three markers. And Rav Lichtenstein, I think, really endowed us with these three, and the Yeshiva endowed us with these three. Number one, intellectual honesty. Start with a baseline of what you believe in view, regard, consider ideas, and try to gauge, do they make sense? Do they reconcile? Do they adhere? Do they reflect? Not with an eye to rejecting them, chas v'shalom. Our entire world is built on traditions. We have to accept, we have to submit. But without that filter to try to reconcile or justify ideas with your personal baseline, you'll never internalize it.
Right.
Because your internal identity is what you believe in. And then your ideas just remain very general, very vague. They call them rayonot merachafot, ideas that are merachif on your identity rather than being mu'ugan and anchored in your identity. So approach things with intellectual honesty, not irreverently, not combatively, but just to use your ideas, trusting yourself, trusting other human beings. Number two, and this is what reminded me, the complexity of the human condition, that human beings are different, and life isn't black and white, as you said earlier. There are shades of gray, and there are different stories. And when you talked about how there's this wave in Torah and anti-doctor sentiment, I said, well, let's hear what they have to say. There's another story here. And I think it came from Rav Lichtenstein's humanism. He really deeply believed in human beings.
Right.
If human beings have certain formulas, there must be some validity or integrity to it. And the third part is, you can disagree with someone without the body language and the character assassination. So many of our issues in Israel today are not when people lodge their opinions, but how they refer to those who disagree with their opinions.
Right.
The name calling and the derision and the body language.
Yeah.
And just you disagree, but it doesn't have to lead to wholesale rejection of other people.
Right.
So it looks like our time is up. I love staying in Los Angeles. Maybe we'll stay a little bit longer. Record this morning. I love being to my Etshalom. But come back to the mountain, come back to your home. And
Be there in a couple of weeks to visit.
Okay, we'll continue with the next parsha.
Excellent.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you. Shabbat shalom.